Hey guys, so we are discussing assessment. And one reminder is that when we talk about assessment in learning, your assessment in learning is a systematic and purpose-oriented collection, analysis, and interpretation of evidence of student learning. So look at plus the word that you are trying to collect evidence of student learning. So in other words, hindi tayong pwedeng mag-assume na ay itong si Rachel, for example, happy lang sa klase ko, siguro matalino to. Okay, hindi po pwede tayong mag-assume. So we need to collect evidences to prove whether our students are indeed learning or not. Okay, that's one important thing. Then class, we use this evidence to promote and manage learning. So if you will be asked, what's the purpose of assessment? The purpose class of assessment is to promote and manage the learning process. Okay, take note, no? Oftentimes kasi, we mistake assessment with the term evaluation. Okay, we mistake the term assessment with evaluation. So class, when we talk about assessment, assessment is not only about grades. Assessment is not only talking about whether your student passed or failed, but assessment class is talking about how to promote and how to manage the learning process of your student. Okay, that's one important thing that you need to remember about assessment. Now, allow me to walk you through some of the terms here that we have. One class of the term that we will be doing and we are also engaged with is the term measurement. So class, when I say measurement, it is the process of quantifying the attributes of an object. That's the general term, huh? It quantifies the attributes of the object. Diba? For example, if I will say, hey, measure the wall, if what's its length, that's measurement in mathematics, right? But class, when I talk about measurement in learning, it is the actual collection of information in student learning through the use of various strategies and tools. Okay, so class, collection of information on student learning using various strategies and tools. Now, what do we mean by various strategies and tools? No? Class, when I am assessing the learning of my students, okay lang ba that I will only have one requirement for the entire year? Is that okay, my dear students? The one requirement na ako for the entire year to assess whether my student learned or not? What do you think? Sige na, ideas. Okay lang ba yon? Abigail, what do you think? Is it okay for me to have only one requirement for the entire year?
Can you repeat, sir?
If I am assessing the learning of my students, is it okay ba for me to have one requirement for the entire school year?
Yes, sir. Kasi sir, din ang man mabalaan man naton ang lima ng students mo, sir.
So okay lang Abigail nga isa lang ka requirement or do I need several requirements also? Aha. Sige, let's hear the idea of Sapphire. Sige, yes, Ms. Tabangay, go ahead.
Good noon, sir. I believe, sir, na hindi po necessary na dapat isa lang po yung assessment na i-provide mo sa students mo throughout the year po because there are different topics that the students are able to learn po. So, if nasa situation po tayo na gano'n, dapat po I think, after ng topic po, magbigay po tayo ng assessment. So,
Okay. So, good point on that, no? So, tulad din ng na-agree kanina ni Abigail, we do not just focus on one single requirement, but instead we need to have various requirements when we are evaluating our students. So, when I say class various requirements, dapat several, no? But when I say class various strategies and requirements, just make sure that you are not also flooding your students, you are not also bombarding your students with too many requirements. Okay? Ano pong ibig sabihin natin when we say various strategies and tools? Depending on the skills that we are teaching our students, we need to assess their learning. For example, if you're teaching English to your students, you need to evaluate. Do they know reading comprehension? So you will give them an essay, for example, and then you will ask questions regarding that essay. If you're teaching them world literature, for example, you would need to check, can they understand what's the literature in Asian countries? What's the literature in English countries? Diba? Pwedeng ganon. So hindi siya pwede class at the end of the semester, I would just give them, let's say for example, no, I would just give them a final exams and then that will be their grades. So when I talk about measurement, it refers to the collection class of information on student learning. Okay, that's the collection of information on student learning. Then the next term here is evaluation. Class, when we talk about evaluation, take note that assessment, okay, class evaluation is actually considered by other authors to be part of assessment. Evaluation class is considered by other authors to be part of assessment, whereas other authors class would argue that assessment class is different from evaluation. Kay other authors class would say that assessment is different from evaluation. Now, what is evaluation then? When I say class evaluation, it is the process of making value judgment on the information collected from the measurement based on a specified data. Okay, guys, you don't need to copy word for word. I have given you the handout in Canvas in case that you have already accessed it. So class, pag sinabi kong evaluation, we are making a judgment. We are making a judgment. Let's say for example, no, I've noticed that your quiz number 1, I've noticed that your quiz number 1 is low. Let's say for example that your score for quiz number 1 is 10 out of 20. Your score for quiz number 2 is only 15 out of 30. Your score for quiz number 3 is only 22 out of 50. From that, I would be able to deduce that there is some problem with the performance of my student. Okay? And then plus when I will make my evaluation, I will be able to say that this student is less than 50% of the performance. Okay? Because his scores are not reaching 50% on the average. So class, I'm making an evaluation based on the information that I have collected from the measurement. In other words, class, no, when you do your measurement, diba, you do your measurement 1, you do your measurement 2, measurement 3, measurement 4, these several measurements students would be able to help you have an evaluation. If we would put that in context of teaching or if in the context of requirements, for example, quiz number 1, quiz number 2, then you would have your output number 1, and then you would have, for example, your group activity number 1. If you have noticed that the student has a poor performance among these quizzes and output, you will be able to evaluate the performance of the student. And then class, it is an actual process of making a decision or judgment based on the information that you have collected from the measurement. So, what's the message here? When I talk about evaluation class, when does evaluation happen? Does it happen at the start of the course or at the end of the course? When does evaluation happen? Does it happen at the start or the end? Sige na, evaluation. When we talk about evaluation. Yes, Micah, go ahead.
Evaluation, sir, at the end of the course.
Na, pag sinabi natin class evaluation, it happens at the end of the course. Okay? It happens at the end of the topic. It happens at the end of the certain project. At the end. Basta sa end. O sir, anong pinagkaiba? If you will differentiate class assessment, no? If you will differentiate assessment and evaluation class, for example, no, if this entire line, my dear students, is the entire project or the entire course that we have, we do assessment here at the start. We do assessment here in the middle. We do assessment here at the near end. But when we talk about the end class, you have your evaluation already. Okay? So evaluation, that's why sometimes when we say summative exam, pag sinabi ko class summative exam, saan ba siya usually binibigay? At the start or the end? When I say summative exam, when is it usually given? At the start or the end? Summative. Sige na. Anybody?
At the end, sir.
Okay, usually binibigay siya at the end. That's why class, when we talk about summative exam, usually they would say that summative exam is also a form of evaluation. Okay? That's the point if evaluation and assessment could be differentiated. Now, look at the terms now. Let's look other terms. And one is testing. Assessment and testing. So class, testing is actually the most common form of assessment. Di ba? Dati-rati nga, for example, if I would hear assessment, I am thinking of giving a quiz. No? So because the most common form of assessment that we have is testing. Now class, it is a use of a test or battery of tests. Pag sinabi nating battery of tests, it could be sets of tests, it could be series of tests, it could be several tests to collect information on student learning over a specific period of time. Okay, that's the purpose of your testing. And again, i-highlight yung most common form, no? Because you could not deny, no? You could not deny. Di ba? Some students will ask, sir, pwede wala lang ta quiz? Or some students will ask, sir, pwede wala lang major exam? So class, the most common form of assessment is still testing, no? Proven by science to be effective. Now, look at this quote here. A test is a form of assessment, but take note that not all assessments use test or testing. Okay, again class, a test is a form of assessment, but not all assessments, my dear students, will be using it, no? Will be using it as testing. Now, what do we mean by that? Although class, most common form siya ng assessment, it is not the only form of assessment. Okay? I could ask you to stand in front and I could ask you to discuss, that's still assessment. I could ask you to present your output, that's still assessment. It does not necessarily need to be a quiz. Now, let's have an overview on the different types of tests because later on we will touch base on this in a detailed way. Now, when we talk about types of test class based on response, pwede siyang selected response, pwede din siyang constructed response. Pag sinabi kong selected response, one example, matching type. Okay? Bakit? Because you selected something and that will be your answer. That's why matching type is considered to be selected response. When I say class constructed response, no, you construct your response. For example, essays. Di ba, in essay, you don't have a choice. You need to make your answer there. And then class, when I talk about short answers, pag sinabi kong short answers class, alam niyo yung mga questions wherein you just need to respond in 1 to 2 sentences. Okay? Or wherein there is just a question wherein, what is your opinion about? Or what is the main topic of the story? Those are short answers. No? So it does not require you to elaborate. Those are short answers. Now, be careful naman. Ano? There are educators, for example, na yung title ng section, essay. Question number 1, what are the 10 commandments? Now react. Is this an essay? Fellow educators of the future, is that an essay? If that will be my question. Sige, ideas. No, sabi ni Micah. How about you, Andrew? What do you think about it? Is that considered to be an essay?
No, sir.
Ano siya, Andrew?
sir.
Kung hindi siya essay, Arjun. Kung hindi siya essay, ano siya?
Enumeration, sir.
Very good, no? That's actually an enumeration. Okay? So alam nyo kasi sometimes, depending on the course that you are handling, there are courses that would need constructed response. Okay? May courses talaga guys na need constructed response. For example, if you are triggering critical analysis, I would need to have constructed response. Kasi hindi pwede na all the time you will just have multiple choice. Ano? Or for example, I would want you to do literally analysis. Hindi class pwede na all the time multiple choice na lang yung questions natin. So class, you need to have what you call this, your constructed response. So be careful ha. I have already encountered examinations which will say essay, pero ayun pala, enumeration siya. Okay, so you need to be mindful about that. Then, other than that, other types of tests that you have. So class, you also have your types of tests based on format. So you have your objective format and then you also have your subjective format. Now class, for your objective format, example, multiple choice, enumeration, nandiyan din si matching type natin. No? Now, for your subjective format, you have one example is your essay. Guys, if I will say identification, is it objective format or subjective format? Identification. Is it an objective format or subjective format? Sige nga, I would like to hear from, yes, Rachel. Rachel, when I say identification, is it objective or subjective?
Objective po.
Objective siya. When I say true or false, Andrew, when I say true or false, is it objective or subjective?
Objective, sir.
Okay, true or false is still considered to be objective. Now, class, madali lang naman isipin kung anong objective, di ba? Pag sinabi nating objective, may direct answer siya. Okay? May direct answer siya pag sinabi siya nating objective. Now, class, when I talk about objective, it's bias-free because items there, class, have exact answers. Di ba? May exact answer siya. So if the answer is A, it's A. If the answer is true, it's true. If the enumeration, class, goes that way, that will be the answer. Okay? Now, when we talk about subjective, class, it's less objective. Less objective. And what do we do to address this less objectivity? Plus, to reduce the problem on objectivity. Okay, to reduce the problem on objectivity, So class, if we would want to address the problem on objectivity, we used your rubrics. Okay, we used your rubrics. So for example, essay, di ba? Essay, 10 points. Class, pag 10 points ang essay mo, dapat may rubric ka. Who would get a score of 10? Who would get a score of 7 to 9? Who will get a score of 5 to 6? Who will get a score of 5 and below? Hindi pwede na, for example, Maika, binasa mo yung essay. Ay, okay, pangit yung idea, 2 lang to. Ay, okay, maganda yung idea, 10 to. Ay, okay, nag-mention siya ng Korean kasi paborito ko yung Korean artist na yan. Gawin natin tong 10. Hindi pwedeng ganon. If you're having class the subjective format of assessment, please make sure that you always have your rubric. Because class, your rubric would increase the objectivity. Plus, your rubric would increase the objectivity of your subjective format. Okay? It would improve, class, the objectivity of your format. Okay? In other words, that would cut the idea. That would cut the idea that you are biased among your students. Okay? So kindly take note of that, the use of your rubrics. Now, you also have the term table of specifications. So if you've heard your instructors, your table of specifications is your TOS. No? So class, tinatawag natin table of specs or your TOS. Class, your TOS maps the essential aspects of the test. And when we talk about the essential aspects of the test, that would include the objectives, that would include the contents, the topics covered by the test, and then the item distribution. Now, point this for example. For example, we are discussing lesson 1 to 3. Okay? For example, we are discussing lesson 1 to 3 in your science subject. Plus, your lesson 1, we discussed it for 2 weeks. Your lesson 2 was discussed for 2 weeks. Your lesson 3 class was discussed for 4 weeks. And then we need to make a 50-item exam. Okay? 50-item exam yung gagawin natin. Class, what lesson do you think would get more items in the exam? Is it the lesson 1, the lesson 2, or the lesson 3? Sige na. This is the duration of discussing each of those lessons. Pagkatapos, kailangan kong gumawa ng 50-item exam. What lesson would receive more items in the exam? Sige, Sapphire, can I hear your ideas?
I think, sir, it's the lesson 1.
Sige. Others? Arjun.
Lesson 3, sir.
What made you think, Arjun, that it will be lesson 3 which will receive more items?
Okay, sir, ang duration niya, sir, is 4 weeks, sir. And amo na ang current nga lesson, sir.
Okay. Sige. How about duration? What's your idea about it?
Lesson 3 man sa akon, sir, kay since 4 weeks siya nga gin lesson. So ang dugdra gid ka focus wala kay 4 weeks siya.
Okay, so class, no, the same input for that, no, the same actually input for that. You would need to think that since the coverage here is longer, this one would receive more items during the discussion or during the examinations. Okay, so class, it would receive more items during the examinations. So that number of items, dear students, would be actually addressed by your table of specifications. So hindi na siya nga haka-haka naton, for example, hindi na siya nga haka-haka, tanga mahambal ay 4 weeks laba siya. So it would receive more items. Actually, we would be computing it. For example, the total of that one is 8 weeks. So that would be 2 divided by 8 times 50. That would mean, class, that I would need to have, kung computation lang sundon ko, guys, this would mean 12.5 items, 12.5 items, and this one would be 25 items. Since you know nga wala man sang item nga 0.5, you might decide that this lesson would receive 13 items and this lesson would receive 12 items and then 25 items. Para mag-total kita nga 50. Okay? So when you are making your exams, it is your table of specifications that will be able to guide you as to how many items are there, what is the coverage of the exam, what is the distribution of the exam. Okay? Now, if you're making your exams also, for example, in the item distribution, we would usually divide the item distribution on the lower order thinking skills and the higher order thinking skills. In other words, you would have your simple recall under here, and then class, you would have your analysis under the HOTS. So class, indeed, for example, pwede nga, question number 1, how many bones are there in the body? A, 201, 202, 203, 206. Tapos question number 2, what is the longest bone in the body? Question number 3, what is the bone that covers the brain? Question number 4, what is the bone that covers the heart? Hindi pwede nga tanan mo nga question simple recall. Those questions that I have given you are considered to be simple recall questions. Kung baga, when I say class simple recall, you will ask the question, the student should right away recall the answer. Okay, that's simple recall. Kung baga, in our terms, memorize, no? You need to memorize for you to respond. But when we talk about higher order thinking skills, for example, you would say, there was this patient wherein the femur was damaged. Okay? What is the most likely problem that would happen to the patient? Then you would write A, bone pain, B, severe bleeding, C, anemia, or letter D, there will be a problem on the structure of the organ. So the student needs to think, what is a femur? Ano nga ba yung femur? So the student needs to think that the femur is a long bone, and because it is a long bone, it contains a lot of bone marrow. Once the bone marrow is depleted, there will be a problem with the blood. So in other words, first, the student needs to analyze before they come up with the answer. And that is what we refer to as their higher order thinking skills. Okay? So in the exams, hindi pwede class na, diba si lesson 3 natin kanina, 25 items. Hindi class pwede na all the 25 items will be simple recall. It also needs to be distributed between class your lower order thinking and your higher order thinking skills. Okay? Are you getting what I mean? Gets yung namin ko, class? Okay? We will have the more specifics of that on the LOTS and the HOTS as we go along the discussion. Okay, that would go back actually to the Bloom's taxonomy. Then class, you have your design and the development of the test. So when we are making your examinations, actually, we do not just do palagpatism and then determine that, oh, lesson 1 would have 10 items, 20 items for lesson 2. Hindi pwedeng ganon. Hindi din class pwede that the entire lesson 1 will be identification and then the entire lesson 2 will be multiple choice. But it is very valid for me to say that 5 items in lesson 1 will be identification. Then 10 items class will be multiple choice. 5 points will be essay. Pero hindi naman pwede class that the entire lesson 3 will be purely essay. Are you getting my point, my fellow educators? Can you get my point on that? Huh? So later on when you are making your exams, no, when you are making your exams, you do not only have one type for each of the lesson. Now class, a good test now is said to be effective. A test, I mean, is good and effective if it has acceptable psychometric properties. So what do we mean by acceptable psychometric properties? Plus, when we say psychometric properties, it does not mean na psychological ang kina-measure niya, ha? Okay? Plus, it simply means that it measures what it intends to measure. Okay? We also have tests, we also have statistics to determine whether the test is indeed good or effective. What are the examples of this now? What are the characteristics of a good and effective test? Class, a good and effective test is valid. When I say class valid, it measures what it intends to measure. Okay? Again, class, it measures, sorry. When I talk about validity, class, when I say valid, it measures what it intends to measure. I'm still working on my screen here. Okay, so class, please write it down. When I say valid, it measures what it intends to measure. So, for example, if we are making an exam on PE, I do not expect to see their items about chemistry because class, it's a PE subject, di ba? It measures what it intends to measure. O for example, PE ang klase ko, tapos ang items ko lahat doon, math. I could not conclude then that my exam is good because it does not measure what it intends to measure. So again, class, the key word there is, I would like to write it down. So class, the key word there is that it measures what it intends to measure. When I talk about reliability naman, class, it talks about consistency. It talks about consistency. Meaning, if I will give an exam on PE, if Erwin is a good performer and he got high, Rachel, who is also a good performer, should also get high scores. Micah, who is also a good performer, will also be able to get high scores. Meaning, class, consistent ang pag-evaluate ng examination na ginawa ko. Now, another way, if you can recall in your sciences, another way, class, for us to demonstrate the validity and reliability is like this. No? If we're talking about bullseye, class, okay, if it hit the bullseye, that's considered valid. Okay, if it hits the bullseye, it's considered to be valid. Now, class, when it hits a point, if it consistently hit a point somewhere here, okay, 1, 2, 3. This one class is considered to be reliable. In other words, kahit ilang beses pa akong nag-dart, consistent na yun ang tinatamaan, that's considered class to be reliable. But when I talk about class something that is both valid and reliable, it should be consistently in the middle. Okay, that's valid and reliable. Okay? Now, the common example that I give my students is this. My actual birthday is April 7. My actual birthday is April 7. If Rachel would ask me, sir, what is your birthday? And then I said, my birthday is April 9. Sapphire asked me, sir, what's your birthday? I said April 9. Abigail asked me, my birthday is April 9. That data is actually reliable. However, is that valid? Is it valid? If I told you that my birthday is April 9, despite the fact that my birthday is actually April 7. Is that valid, guys? Erwin, is that valid?
Yes, sir.
Abigail, is that valid?
Not valid, sir.
It's not valid, huh? Erwin, take note, my actual birthday is April 7. Okay, but I just consistently said that my birthday is April 9, April 9, April 9. It's reliable, but it's not valid. Okay? Remember, your goal in education is that it should be both valid and reliable. Okay, it should be both valid and reliable. So class, no, for example, if I would want to measure your knowledge, no, if I would want to measure your knowledge in mathematics, di ba class, the one way for us to measure knowledge in mathematics is that, okay, for example, our lesson is about the properties of addition. Okay, so for example, I would have 5 plus 6 plus 2, di ba may mga parentheses, tapos 5 plus 6 plus 2. Okay, for example, I would want to discuss about the associative property of addition. Okay, that's class one way to evaluate the knowledge in mathematics. So this one class is considered to be valid. But for example, I would want to evaluate knowledge in mathematics and then I ask you, in a scale of 1 to 5, I love mathematics. Then you would agree, no? For example, Mambal, 5 strongly agree, 1 strongly disagree. If the student answered 1, I strongly disagree. I am not actually measuring knowledge in mathematics. Instead, class, pag ganito yung ginawa ko, I'm actually measuring their attitude towards mathematics. So the test is not valid. Okay, the test will not be valid. Okay, I hope that you're getting the point. So class, a good and effective test would also have acceptable level of difficulty. Okay? Hindi mo goal as a teacher na pahirapan yung student mo. And hindi mo din goal as a teacher na madaliin yung students mo or would make life very easy for your students. Okay? Now, there is this fallacy that commonly occurs among teachers. For example, they would say, oh, the scores of my student are very high. Siguro next exam dapat pahirapan ko yung exam para bababa na naman yung score nila. That's a very wrong idea. It's also a very wrong idea for you to say na para hindi magreklamo yung students ko, I will make their test easy. Diba? Parang may ganong mentality na, okay, para hindi sila magreklamo, para walang complaint kay principal, walang complaint kay superintendent, walang complaint kay dean, I would make the exams easy para perfect sila agad. Hindi po ganon ang acceptable level of difficulty. Okay? You are not there to give away grades. You are also not there to fail your students, but it should be acceptable level of difficulty. And then class, a good and effective test should be able to discriminate between learners with higher and lower ability. In other words, pag matalino siya sa math, tataas talaga yung scores niya sa math pag tama yung test mo. Pag bobo siya sa math, sorry for using the term bobo, we are not supposed to use it as educators. Pag he's having difficulty in math, you would notice also that their scores in math are low. Okay? So that's one thing, no? So dapat we will be able to differentiate between these types of learners. Okay? Now, class assessment and grading. In your grading class, when we talk about grading, it means that it's the process of assigning value to the performance or achievement, okay, to the performance or achievement of the learner, okay, based on a specified criteria or standards using tests and tasks. Look at the words test and task. So hindi siya class pwede na test lang, hindi siya pwede na task lang. It needs to be a combination of a test and a task. Okay? Class, when we talk about specified criteria, look at that one. We have a specified criteria. That's why if you would review the orientation that we had, class, you would see there that you will have prelim 15%, midterm 20%, tapos finals would be 25%, quizzes 25%, performance task 15%. That's our criteria. Kumbaga, class sa pageant, hindi pwede na lahat kayo tatayo sa stage, tapos magdi-declare na lang ako na sige, si Erwin yung first place, tapos si Sapphire yung second place, kasi feel ko lang. Hindi pwedeng ganon. Di ba class, kung sa pageant may criteria, di ba? May criteria. Dapat may ano pa nga, beauty, brains, interview, night gown, mga ano man. And the same way class, when you are grading your students, there should be a criteria. Hindi pwede na papasok kayo ng klase ko, tapos by the end of the semester, I will tell you, Abigail 2.0, ikaw Arjun 2.25, ikaw Sapphire 1.75. Hindi pwedeng ganon. There should be a criteria. And that criteria should be informed to your students. Dapat alam nila kung ano yung criteria na gagamitin natin. And then class, when I talk about evaluation, when I talk about grading, I mean, it's also a form of evaluation which provides information on whether a learner passed, no? That's a learner class, whether a learner passed or failed a subject or a particular assessment task. So in other words, your grading actually is a way for us to quantify the performance of the student. It's a quantification of the performance of the student for them to know whether they passed or failed the subject or a particular assessment task. Now, since we are to become educators, dapat guys, hindi lang tayo focus sa pass or fail at the end of the subject. Okay, for example, if this is the entire course that your students is taking, do not think of the pass or fail at the end of the subject. Instead, you should be able to anticipate. For example, no, at the start of the program, na-notice mo that student A is already a poor performer. Yung scores niya, class, is below the passing line. Right away, class, if you've noticed that the student is failing, you already call the attention of the student. And then class, after you call the attention of the student, you also intervene. You try to help the student if what's going wrong. If consistently siya class na bumabagsak, you need to do remediation to the student and you need to be able to educate the student if what's really happening. Okay? Class, no, in college, I've observed that there are students by which nangyayaring ganito because they do not love the course wherein they are enrolled to. But there are actually students who's happening wherein they experience that because they do not understand the way you discuss the lessons. Okay, hindi nila na-understand on how you discuss the lessons. So, what would you do, no? Hindi mo naman right away pwedeng sabihin na, sige, lipat ka na lang ng teacher. Instead, class, you offer alternative modes of learning. Sabi mo, oh, there are handouts that I could provide. These are the materials that I would allow you to read. Kindly read and let's see if there are improvement that could happen. Okay, if wala pa ring improvement, class, you would need to refer the students maybe to your department head so that they will be able to address what are the other remedies that are available. Pag nag-fail na po kasi ang student dito sa end, that would already mean that all other remedies that were being done already failed. Okay? So hindi class pwede na hayaan nyo lang si student to hear that are failing and then at the end of the semester inform them, I'm sorry, you failed. Okay? That's not how an educator works. Okay? That's not how an educator works. So I hope that you will be able to remember that. So for example, particular assessment task, mahina yung performance, you need to inform the student. No? Student, your output number 1 seems to be of poor quality. Okay? And that will prompt the student, okay, nanonotice pala ni ma'am, nanonotice pala ni sir, so I need to do better. Now, class, when we talk about grading, look at those items that are included in grading. Recitation, homework, seat work, at saka project. Now, if you would look at it there, is attendance on the list? Is attendance on the list? Future educators, is attendance part of grading?
No, sir.
Okay, so guys, that is a reminder to us that attendance is not actually part of your grading system. Sir, bakit po kami nire-require ng attendance? Plus, your attendance could be required by school policy. But take note, class, that your attendance is not part of grading na supposedly. Okay, so that's one principle that you need to remember in the teaching process. And when I talk about the final grade, my dear students, it refers to the summation of information from multiple sources. Diyan na naman yung multiple sources. In other words, several tasks or requirements, and as emphasized earlier, di ba? Task and test. You need to have task and test. Okay? In other words, I could not give you a final grade because of your recitation alone. I could not give you a final grade because of your performance in your assessment or performance in your final exams. Dapat several assessment tasks po yung titingnan natin. And that is our goal as a teacher, that we need to give our students several tasks or requirements. But as I would again emphasize, hindi po ito paramihan ng assessment. Okay? Baka later on kayo maging teachers tapos sabihin nyo, ay sabi ni Sir Perks, dapat several tasks and requirements. Tapos in 1 week, tig-5 yung requirements nyo sa mga students nyo. That's not what we meant. That's not what we meant. For example, if we're talking about PE, there will be instances that you would ask them to perform return demonstration. Diba? Magde-demonstrate sila. If we're talking about, for example, mathematics, there will be a time that you will ask them mastery. No? You will ask them mastery for that. So it would depend on the subject matter that you are teaching. Okay, so as long as you have several tasks or requirements. Okay, so class, in the succeeding discussions ko na i-discuss yung framework in assessments. Okay, do you have any questions in mind?